Some emotions are more profound than others. And we lose lots of things in life that we care about. So sadness is a part of life, but sometimes the sadness is quite small and, we get over it in 5 minutes. It's very short-lived. And sometimes the sadness is so profound. The man who co-wrote the Field Guide to Emotions with me passed away 18 months ago. And I feel many days a loss. I feel sad about the fact that we can no longer collaborate. I can no longer talk to him. And I expect that that'll be with me for the rest of my life, right? So that's for me a profound sadness. The very first thing you can do is you can have a practice of noticing and naming your emotions. One of the things I assign to all my students is 3 times a day, pause, notice your emotion, just write down the name. I think to certainly have the kind of conversation you and I are having is really valuable.
Welcome to another episode of Life Coach Code. Today I have something truly extraordinary for you. I have something that you will not want to miss. This November, from 11th till 14th of November, we are organizing a virtual 4-day summit. It's called the Superhuman Summit, and it's going to focus on the 4 fundamental pillars of the human being: the spirit, the mind, the body, and the heart. This summit its sole purpose is to help you uncover, embrace, and harness the 4 superpowers that you carry within yourself, hidden within each of these 4 pillars. That's why each day is focused on one of these 4 fundamental pillars. We start with the spirit, and on this day we will have coaches that will talk about how to find your purpose, how to reshape your belief system, how to remove negative beliefs, how to raise your consciousness, all of the topics that are aligned with the spiritual pillar, but also giving you a hint and a glimpse of what the real superpower in the pillar of the spirit is. All of the coaches that will speak on this summit will give you hints that will help you become more aware of these 4 superpowers. We will have talks, workshops, panels. Each day there will be over 25 coaches. There will be over 12 workshops. As I said, panels. There will be a lot of free gifts that the coaches will give to you. And we are really trying to make this summit as most affordable as possible. For the price of less than 1 meal, you can get the 4-day pass and be present in this superhuman experience with over 25 coaches. It's not, if you get a coach, it's like working with one coach for one thing, one specific thing. But this is like working with over 25 experts on all the 4 domains of your being, each day focused on one and helping you transform. In 4 days, we are guaranteeing that you will be transformed into a superhuman. So if you want to get your 4-day pass, go to the link in the description or go to lifecoachcode.com/superhuman summit, and you will not regret it, because this is probably the best event that you will not want to miss. If you want to join, grab your ticket in the link on the description, or go to lifecoachcode.com/superhuman summit. You will get the tickets there. Today I have a special guest. It's one of the coaches that will talk on this summit. It's Dan Newby, and Dan will talk today with me. We will discuss a little bit about the topic on the summit and a little bit about him, who he is, his work, and how he became the expert that he is. I will share a little bit about Dan right now. Dan is the founder of the School of Emotions, dedicated to enhancing emotional literacy for individuals and organizations. He co-authored the Field Guide to Emotions and the Unopened Gift, a primer in emotional literacy, and offers courses, mentoring, and coaching to help people harness the power of emotions for personal and professional growth. So Dan, thank you for being here, and welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
So let's jump right into it. What are emotions?
Great question. When I started this work, I thought, oh, this is an easy question to answer. I'll go to Google, I'll get the answer. As it turns out, there's not actually a universal interpretation or definition that is very practical. If you look in the dictionary, it says something like it's an affective state. Sometimes it says it's a feeling. But the way I think about them is I think about the Latin root of emotion, which is that moves you, or that puts you in motion. And that's really how I think about emotions is anybody, if you stop to notice how you feel, the energy you feel in your body, and how it's wanting you to move, whether you move that way or not, how it's connected with your thoughts, that energy for me is an emotion.
So there is a lot of debate about what are emotions. Also in the field of psychology, there are a lot of theories and concepts about emotion, feeling, stimuli, all of these things, how they interact together. I heard one theory that probably one theory that I follow the most and I believe the most is that an emotion is basically the label we put on the sensations that we feel in our body. So would you agree with this theory?
I would say yes, but in my view, it's more than that. So yes, we have a certain sensation, but every emotion has an impulse, meaning it wants us to do something, or we feel like doing something very specific in that emotion. And the other thing I connect with emotions is every emotion has a purpose. So I think that the sensation part I agree with, and that's often what people refer to as a feeling. But I would say an emotion is more than a feeling. It encompasses also what direction or with what energy we feel like moving. And the other piece is why is it there? What's its purpose? What's it trying to tell us? How is it trying to help us? So there's an intellectual component, there's a somatic component. And for me, every emotion has a purpose. It exists for some reason. It's not random.
I love what you said that every emotion has a reason and a purpose. I also believe strongly that each emotion has a message that is trying to tell you. And
Yep.
if you uncover the messages that each emotion is trying to tell you, you will be more able to react in the most appropriate way to help your growth. For example, if you feel fear or you feel anger, instead of reacting on this emotion, you should, in my opinion, make space to observe the emotion so you can understand what you're feeling first. And then when you know what you're feeling, you can go back and remind yourself, okay, so what this emotion is actually saying. So when you know the message and you know the information, then you can direct your actions and choices toward the more constructive option for you. Because that's why, in my opinion, the emotion exists to tell you something. For example, anger is telling us that either we didn't have our needs met or somebody's stepping over our boundaries and we need to defend our territory. So whenever anger happens, and because we are humans, we are a lot more complex than animals. We have social structures and everything. So somebody stepping over your boundary is not as simple as an animal taking food from some other animal. It can be somebody approaching your girl or somebody trying to get promoted in front of you. So somebody stepping over your boundaries is a lot more complex than in the animal kingdom. So that's why we feel anger. But when you know what anger actually represents, you will not allow it that much to color your reality and to decide your choices based on this energy that anger is carrying with, because we all know what anger it is, like stepping your food, throwing things, like that's the natural reaction that anger wants you to do. However, if we know the information, we can maybe shift the behavior that we are linking with anger. So what is your opinion on this? Are there behaviors that are encoded with each emotion that cannot be changed, or is the emotion, like I'm saying, a message that we have certain behaviors because of our culture that we just encoded with this emotion and we are behaving in a certain way?
Yep. So for me, you're talking about two things. One is every emotion has a unique underlying narrative or story. So for anger, for me, it's very specific. What provokes anger in us is when we believe that something unjust or morally wrong has been done. Now, it may have been done to us, or it may have been done to somebody we care about, but the essence is that moral wrongness or the injustice. So anger is it's a mechanism. It allows us to realize when something unjust has been done that affects us. And then with our response, one thing we can do is to seek to create more justice, right? So, oh, okay, so now anger actually has a very useful purpose, because if I didn't have anger, I wouldn't recognize, I wouldn't know what I believe is just and unjust. But every emotion has this. Sadness has the narrative of I've lost something I care about, right? Affection is, I like this person, I enjoy time with them, but every emotion has a unique narrative. So then what happens is, so we may think first and then feel the emotion, or we may feel the emotion and then realize what we're thinking. But every emotion also has this reactive phase or this impulse. But what you're talking about in creating space or time to reflect on, well, what's this emotion trying to tell me, helps us move from reaction to response. So, for instance, in anger, or let's say fear, right? Somebody comes up behind me and I don't know they're there, and then they just say something. They say, "Hello, Dan," and I jump. Well, that jumping is the reaction. And that, although we can learn to moderate it, I would say we don't necessarily want to, because that's what keeps us safe. That's what helps us take care of ourselves. But the challenge is that sometimes that reaction doesn't get us what we truly want or need. So in anger, like you said, we may ignore somebody because we're angry. We may throw something. We may yell, right? We may do all of these things in reaction. But our response, if we thought about it, would be focused on how do we take away the injustice, or how do we create more justice? So I think that, we can get very precise about emotions, about the narrative, the impulse, the purpose, and we can learn tools like, how do I purposely move from reaction to response, if that's going to help me resolve the issues in my life.
So do you make a distinction between an impulse and an emotion, or is just the impulse the reaction for the emotion, and it's not in itself a layer of feeling? For example, that's my
Yep.
question.
Yep. Well, I thought this was another question I thought Google was going to answer for me when I started in this area, is what is an emotion, and how do we know which things are emotions and which things are not? And one of the things I discovered was that if you Google lists of emotions, you'll get 50 different lists. And if you compare them, every list will be different. Now, some will all have anger on them, but there's lots of things that some lists will have and some lists won't, and others, they won't be consistent. And what I realized when I started working with this is that whoever wrote the list had criteria. They had a way to decide what goes on the list and what doesn't. So I started thinking about, well, what are my criteria? And in the Unopened Gift, in the first book that I wrote with Lucy Nunez, we talk about, we need a standard, and our standard of criteria was three things. It was, there's a story or an underlying narrative, which it's what we're thinking or believing or saying. So it's the intellectual side of the emotion. There's an impulse. Our body feels like doing something. Doesn't mean we have to do it, but we feel like doing something. And the third is that it has a purpose. It supports us in some way. It's there to help us in some way, or it helps us do something we couldn't do if we didn't have this emotion. So those are our criteria. Now, that's our interpretation. It's not the interpretation. It's not the truth. But I think that anybody who's working with emotions, and coaches in particular, but anybody else, needs to reflect on this for themselves. What are their criteria for what makes something an emotion and not an emotion? Because that helps make sense of them. That actually makes them quite logical when you think about it. There's a structure to them that we can identify, that's consistent, that we can teach or we can learn. So for me, that's what they are, those three elements: story, impulse, and purpose. So any emotion, you could name any emotion, and we could explore, well, what do we feel like doing in that emotion? And generally, what I find is that it's quite universal, is that the narrative, although, of course, it's an interpretation into language, the narrative is fairly consistent across cultures, across geographies, across ages, ages in your life, across experience. And so once you begin to talk with people about these and look at them in depth, one of the things that has been so lovely for me to realize is how universal they are. Now, the way cultures live emotions or individuals is different, of course, but the underlying structure, sort of the mechanics of emotions, is fairly universal, which means that I don't have to know you or know your experiences or know your background or know your culture. If I just realize that the palette of emotions that I have is pretty consistent with the palette of emotions you have, then when you start saying, Dan, I think this is really unfair, what can I hear? Oh, it's sounding like resentment to me, because for me, the link in language to resentment is unfairness, the belief that something is unfair. And what's beautiful about that is that it allows us to coach or work with people from different cultures without being experts in their culture or their background or their traditions. But by exploring emotions, we're exploring something that we share as human beings.
I agree with what you say, and I will also add that emotions, as you say, are the experience of emotion is universal. We all feel emotions, just like we can all see a color. But the debate comes when, for example, I'm saying that I'm seeing blue, and you are saying you're seeing blue. But how can we prove that the blue I'm seeing is the same blue you are seeing? We all have the same experience, but maybe the experience that you have is different. Maybe you're seeing a different color that you're calling blue, and I'm seeing a different color that I'm calling blue. So it can be same with the emotions. Maybe I'm experiencing anger, but I'm experiencing in a different way, yet I'm calling it an anger, and you're experiencing in a different way, and you're calling it an anger. So, but the one thing here, and why this probably argument cannot be given to emotions, is because the underlying narrative, as you say, and that's what I love about what you said, the underlying narrative behind anger is same universally. Like, people will not feel a different emotion if they feel something unfair was done, right? They will feel either anger, sadness, or revolt, right? So these are the underlying story is basically determining the emotion that you're gonna feel. As I don't know if you're familiar with. I'm sorry if you want to add something.
Yeah, so just briefly is that one way to approach this is, in the end, this isn't about being right or wrong about, what emotion is it. What's really important is that if I'm going to coach you, you and I need to agree on the interpretation we're using for a certain emotion. Let's say envy. Let's pick an emotion. So I could share with you, well, here's what I think envy means. Here's what the impulse I think most people feel in envy. Here's the purpose. And you might say, well, I don't know if that's envy. Well, that's fine. And then the question I would have for you is, what emotion, or what do you call the emotion that's the experience when you experience a certain thing? So if you experience injustice, you have an emotion show up. What do you call that emotion? So it allows us to explore, not based on, I know the answer, but it's a little bit like building a house, right? You know what a house is, I know what a house is, right? You have your interpretation of anger, I have my interpretation of anger. But if we're just talking about houses socially, it's perfect. Yeah, okay, we just talk about our houses, we kind of know what those are, what they mean. But if we're going to build a house together, we better have the same set of plans, because otherwise we're working in opposition to each other. We'll never get a house built because we're not talking about the same thing. Right? But if we share a set of plans, if we agree to the interpretation of what is a house, then we can build a house together without friction, right? So it's not about, well, what's the right house? It's what house are we going to build? And with emotions, this is how I work with them, is that, it's not important to me if people adopt my interpretation, but if we're going to have a serious conversation, a coaching conversation or a learning conversation about emotions or a specific emotion, then the first thing we need to do is agree on what does that emotion mean. Let's agree on the interpretation, and then we can talk about what to do with it, how to shift it, how it helps us, how it gets in our way, etc.
It's same I can say with words and language. The
Sure.
most of the problems that arise in relationships are just because we have different meanings to the same words, right? For
Yeah,
somebody, that's the word commitment or promise can mean a different thing, and slightly
absolutely.
different thing, but it can spark up conflict.
Yeah,
So just being
perfect example. Yeah.
being just being clear to what the words mean can solve so many issues. In the same way, just being clear about what the emotions that you are addressing as emotions mean can can give you so much clarity about your life. So what would you say? Because in this comparison with language, the more words you know, the more literate you are. So how
Mhm.
will you say that the because let me give you an example. We have a lot of sensations that we feel that we still don't have a label to. We don't know the words to these concepts, let's say. For
Mhm.
example, you are traveling with a girl and she's sleeping on your shoulder. You're feeling a certain sensation, an emotion. Is not happiness, it's not pleasure, it's not peace, it's a different thing, but you don't have a label to this. There is
Mhm.
also a sensation you feel when you watch two old people holding hands walking on the street. You
Mhm.
get certain feeling, certain sensation, but we don't have the label. And a lot of different cultures have different words for different emotions, different labels that they put that we are not aware of, for example, in the West. So
Yep.
how do you think, how much important is to know as many emotions as possible, to put as many labels as possible to these sensations that we're feeling each day?
Yep. So, two things about what you said. One, if as you think about language, why is it beneficial to know more words? Well, in my view, it gives you choice, right? You can select from a variety of words. And why is that important? Because you can be more precise, right? Fast, rapid, in a hurry, right? These are all ways of expressing the pace of somebody, but they have nuance to them. They mean slightly different things. And so, of course, they still may mean something different to me than to you, but the language piece is the reason that we want all those words is because it gives us distinctions in those with those minor small differences between things. It's why we have a word for banana and apple and we don't just call everything fruit. Why? Well, because it helps us. If we want a banana, we get a banana rather than whatever the person happened to have that was fruit. So with emotions, I think it's quite similar, is that the value of understanding more emotions than we do now, becoming more emotionally literate, is it gives us choice and it gives us clarity, right? If you only have the word anger, but you use it for frustration, irritation, annoyance, disappointment, for a variety of emotions, you're lacking distinctions. And so you can't understand yourself what's happening, but you also can't express it to anybody else. But if you understand, oh, actually, it's not anger, I feel irritated. Okay. Now you can be more precise about your experience so someone else can understand you, or vice versa. So the whole point isn't just to look smart and have a big vocabulary, but the more distinctions that we have and the deeper they are, the clearer we are about what does it feel like to me when I experience that emotion. What you're saying is lovely. It's a lovely analogy with words. It's just in the domain of emotions rather than the domain of intellect.
I completely agree with this, and it's a really interesting thing that you said, that the more the more literate we are with emotions, the more precise we can get to the point of what actually this emotional self is trying to tell us. Because there is a difference. I'm also saying, calling this, we have two types of fear, and we're calling them the same fear, just because we are not emotionally literate enough. For example, we have this primal fear that's coming to us every time our life is in danger, in real danger. For example, a bear is attacking us, we feel fear. But we also call fear the emotion we feel when we need to have a public speaking event and we need to speak the next day, and we are feeling this sensation. We say, oh, I'm afraid of speaking in front of people. Well, we call it fear, but it's, if you really sit with yourself, it's completely different sensation and emotion. You are clearly not overthinking when a bear is coming towards you. You are just running away as fast as possible. And it's not that you're gonna sit down and rethink, should I run or not, and have these thoughts in your mind. It's not what happens. But with this other fear that I call fake fear, we are overthinking, we are inventing scenarios that might have happened. We are just, it's preventing us from doing anything, from breathing. So what I say is that these are two completely different emotions. We just put the same label on them, fear. And just because we put the same label, we are not able to be precise about what we're going to do about them when they show up. Thankfully enough, when a bear approaches us, we have these instincts and impulses to run, and we're not really observing the emotion so much. But knowing the difference can help you in so many situations, because what's the purpose of real fear? The purpose of real fear is to protect your life whenever your life is in danger. But the purpose of fake fear is to protect you from danger. So you cannot live your life being protected from danger, because everything can be dangerous. It's subjective. So you can live your whole life being afraid with this fake fear, and it will not care one bit if you live or not if in 1 square meter cell, just because you feel protected in that cell and away from danger. So it will just show up every day, because every day there is danger. So if you just know the difference between real and fake fear, you will know, aha, real fear shows up when my life is in real danger, to protect me from dying, to save my life. Fake fear tries to protect me from death. Death comes to all of us. It will come eventually. So you cannot be protected from death. You cannot live your life optimized around being protected from death. That's why when real fear shows up, it shows up only when your life is in danger, and then it goes away and you can live your life however you want.
Okay, so a couple of things. One thing I would say is that what you're describing may not just be fear, but here's a few emotions that came to me while I was listening to you. Fear, terror, apprehension, anxiety, doubt, panic, right? All of these sometimes people might confuse with fear, because, for instance, the word apprehension, well, you know, a lot of people don't know what that is, or they don't think about using that word. It's not part of their active vocabulary with emotions. And in other cases, they might be feeling terror, but they call it fear. So fear, right, the profile of fear, the story is that what it does is it alerts us to specific dangers. Now, that can be small, right, about cutting ourselves with a knife. It can be while we're cooking, right? So it can be quite small, or it could be confronting a bear. So for me, fear is fear, right? It has to do with recognizing a specific danger and then helping protect us from that. So the thing about fear is that a lot of people call many things fear. And this list that I just shared with you, fear, terror, apprehension, anxiety, doubt, panic, what I find fascinating about emotions is they don't just show up individually. So when you confront the bear, you may feel several of those, but you will call them whatever the most familiar emotion is to you. So you will call it fear. Yeah. But if you really examine it, if you examine the structure and the way we've been talking about, what you may discover is, well, it's not just fear. There's also terror, and there's also panic. There's also doubt. So you may have several emotions occurring at the same time, triggered by a single event. And this is quite common. And this is why people say, well, I'm a little bit confused. I'm a little bit emotionally confused, or a little emotionally conflicted. Well, actually, that's quite normal, is that we have several emotions that show up together. And what we tend to do is we tend to act based on whichever emotion is strongest in that moment. Yeah. So in that moment, when the bear shows up, if it's terror, you run like crazy to get away from the bear. And that's perfect. That's your reaction, that's your impulse. And what's your story? The bear is going to eat me. I'm going to die. Right. And so it makes perfect sense. But at the same time, you may have other emotions also in there, but you might be calling everything fear. And this is what emotional literacy does. We look at clusters to say, oh, well, what is the difference between jealousy and envy? What is the difference between excitement, enthusiasm, and ambition? And these tend to show up together in certain situations. But if we can see that they're individual and precise emotions, then we can see how much of what is influencing us. We know where we are, and then we can choose what to do with it. And that's the response piece.
So it's, again, I'm going to come back to the analogy of language. It's the same as when we speak, we are not speaking with one word, right? We are not having a sentence with one word. In the same way, our emotional self is not speaking to us with just one emotion. Usually, everything that we experience is a mix of emotions. Sometimes these emotions are a lot less loud, and we can just hear the one emotion and we can act on it. But a lot of times these emotions are a little bit more loud, and that's as you say, when we say we feel mixed emotions, or we don't know what we feel at all, because we don't have emotional literacy to distinguish between each of them, between each word, and understand the sentence that the emotion is actually trying to tell us, because it's different when you experience fear and terror, and it's different when you experience fear and anxiety. So it's a different message.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah, and sometimes the mixed emotions seem to be a little paradoxical. Like they don't seem similar. So for instance, I had a conversation with my son who's 35, and he was telling me about his new job. And in that moment, I felt pride. Yeah. But as he also told me about his emotion, or as his new job, there were things about it that I felt like, oh, you know what? I'd like that to be part of my life or part of my job. And I realized that I was feeling a little bit of envy. Yeah. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. That's just my emotion saying you feel pride and you feel envy. Now, which are you going to respond out of? Well, as a father, the pride was much bigger, much stronger than the envy. But to deny that I felt a little bit of envy is denying a message that's coming to me from my emotions. And if I listen to it, then I think, oh, well, what is it about his job that I would like to have in my life? What's attractive about it? Because there's something I'm seeing that I think would make my life better. And if I can see that, if I can name that, then I can create it. Then I can use that information. So they're not fighting with each other. They're showing up to tell us something about the experience we're having and how we understand it.
I completely agree with this, and this is a subject that I really would like to dive into deep more, because we at Life Coach Code, we have developed a framework for emotions where each emotion is having one of four purposes or underlying narratives, as I said. So it's like a spectrum that, if you understand this spectrum, this framework, you can know where each emotion fits. So we are saying that each emotion is either trying to protect you from something, to keep you away from something, or it's trying to push you towards something that's beneficial for your soul. The third purpose is that the emotion is trying to take energy away from you, so you don't invest any more energy in what you're doing, or to give you more energy, so you invest more in what you're doing because it's also beneficial for your growth. These are basically the messages from your soul, and these are the 4 purposes that why emotions exist. So let's take envy, for example. Envy, we think of it as a negative emotion, but in my opinion, and in a lot of people's opinion, there are no negative and positive emotions. There are just emotions and different messages. There is negative and positive behavior, but there are no negative and positive emotions. Each emotion is just a word that is trying to tell you something. So envy, in our opinion, is trying to tell you that there is something that the other person is doing that you would love to have, as you said, in your life. So this is a pretty interesting and significant emotion, and it's not bad at all, because if you feel envy, you know, aha, so I would like to have that too. And the difference, this is where also emotional literacy comes in. There is a difference between envy and jealousy. Jealousy is the more destructive cousin of envy, because jealousy means I don't want you to have that. Even if I don't have that, I don't want you to have that. I don't want nobody to have that because you have that. But envy is, oh, you have that. I would also like to have that. It's not about the other person. It's not about taking this thing from the other person. So that's the crucial difference between envy and jealousy. And a lot of people will say, when they feel envy, for example, jealousy, or when they feel jealousy, envy, just because they are not emotionally literate. So in this framework, you can fit all of the emotions, and you can know that they have a purpose. They're trying to tell you something. And when you have a mix of emotions, for example, as you said, you spoke with your son, you felt pride and envy, and there were probably other emotions in the conversation too that you felt. Each emotion, you can reconstruct it and get the value, the message that is giving you, the goal that is giving you, and recreate the real sentence of your emotional self, just like a translator. So this is really, that's why it's crucial to have emotional literacy, because what you think your emotions are saying is not what they're actually saying. When you spoke with your son, you understood that the envy you feel, it's about something else. It's not that you are a bad person or that you don't like your son. But a lot of people will think, oh, I'm feeling envy. It means I'm not a good person. I need to suppress this emotion. So they're running away from it. And they believe the emotional self is telling them a different story of what it's actually telling them. In my opinion, it's the analogy of speaking with somebody in a different language, and you don't understand the language, and they're speaking, and they're all of a sudden loud and speaking loud, and you think, why they're screaming at me? I probably did something bad. But you don't understand. Maybe they're just saying that you are beautiful or you're good at what you're doing. So this is where emotional literacy comes in.
So what you just pointed to, for me, is actually a great example of having a conversation about a shared interpretation, because we can put whatever interpretation makes sense to us on emotions. And we have traditional ways of thinking about things. Like you said, envy has been seen as a negative emotion, which means we want to take something away from people, rather than, no, actually, I see something I would like to have in my life. However, what you said about jealousy, I would disagree with in the sense that I have a different interpretation. Jealousy, in the way I understand it, is a fear that I'm going to lose a connection or a relationship. And it can be with another person, it can be with my dog, it doesn't matter. My concern is that I'm going to lose this relationship. And what you described as wanting to deprive somebody else of something has a different word in English, which is obsequiousness. I'm sorry, it's covetousness. Sorry, covetousness. I covet what they have and I want to take it away from them. So again, this isn't about making anybody right or wrong. This is saying, well, let's explore, let's talk about these, because again, if we can do that, we can reflect on, okay, Dan just said this, Dan just presented these ideas. Now, your job, other people's possibility is to think about, oh, well, let's see, maybe, there's a different way to understand jealousy. Maybe there's a word for an emotion I didn't even know existed. And it's not just you. This happens to me. There's times when I hear things and I go, oh my gosh, I wonder if that's an emotion. And I go look it up and I do some research and I go, you know what? I think that is an emotion. And I never have acknowledged it as an emotion. Now, do I have an experience of that emotion? When does that happen for me? What's the story? What's the impulse? What's the purpose? So this conversation is really a conversation of emotional literacy. Like how, let's take a look. Let's not worry about what's right or wrong or the absolute definitions, but let's get really clear what they mean to us. And then let's have a conversation with other people to say, well, tell me why you define or articulate jealousy the way you do. Like, where did that come from? Let me share where my interpretation came from. And let's explore and let's see if we don't learn something from each other in that conversation. And the reason I think that's so valuable, particularly right now, in terms of human development, is because we're all beginners. We're all beginners at this. I'm still a beginner at this, and I've been doing it for years. But I recognize that there's a lot that I don't have a clue about emotions from a practical sense. There's a lot of names, there's a lot of emotions that I haven't identified, articulated, et cetera. So there's a lot I have, but there's a lot that I haven't at all. Like I don't know about yet. And all of us are in that same place. We're just learning to walk. And that's maybe crawl.
Yeah.
And that's fantastic. Great. Well, let's learn. Every human being is an emotional being. So why don't we invite the conversation of learning about this? Because think about how much it could help us.
Do you believe that we should have a universal language of emotions that we should all learn in school, for example?
Well, I think to certainly have the kind of conversation you and I are having is really valuable. I think where it gets a little bit tricky to formalize, for instance, to teach in schools, is again, you have to go back to the criteria. What is an emotion and how do you decide what is and isn't an emotion? So it's really the interpretation you have of emotions. However, what I would argue is that it's absolutely essential that we find a way, and this is happening. Now there are mandates in public schools that they have to teach, well, social emotional learning, which boils down in many cases to emotional literacy. But the challenge is even the teachers need to learn it because the teachers don't know it either. So I think there's energy in this direction. There's a lot of movement in this direction. And I think we're still trying to figure out, well, what would the structure be? How would we do it? But one of the things I'd love to see is, if you think about math, you think about mathematics, we think about even arithmetic, we think about it as an intellectual exercise. However, there are emotions involved with math. And this is why some people feel frustration with math. Some people feel excitement learning math. Some people feel satisfaction learning math. But that emotional aspect, we don't pay any attention to. We say, no, math is math. You just learn it. It's logical. There's no emotions involved in learning this. And I'm like, I don't think that's quite true. There are lots of emotions involved in either learning or are barriers to learning, something like mathematics, which is highly logical and structured. So I think that's the place I'd love to see it. I'd love to see emotions integrated into every subject, into philosophy, into chemistry, because what we've done is we've said, no, all of these subjects are to be approached only from an intellectual perspective. And we've left the emotions out. And one solution is, okay, let's have a course on emotions. And I think, well, okay, we could do that, but wouldn't it be more powerful to integrate emotions into the curriculum of all those other subjects? That's where I think we'll make big leaps, is if we can figure out how to do that.
So I want to get something clear, because let's say somebody's doing science and math and they feel certain emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So wouldn't it be not so much beneficial for them to focus on the emotions instead of the science itself and the logical like representation, the equations, instead of what they're feeling, so they can be more productive. For example, let's give another example. Let's say two people have a business, they have startups, and one person has negative emotions, they are feeling down, they don't want to work. The other person feels the same emotions, but they're just like, no, I have a discipline, I need to work, I want to get up even if I don't feel like getting up, and still working. The other person, of course, will be more productive, the one that is putting on the work, because the reality is this: 2 + 2 is 4. No matter what you feel, 2 + 2 will be 4. So if you put the work, you will get the results, no matter how you feel. So don't you think there are, for example, certain scenarios where focusing too much on the emotions can be not so beneficial than just doing what you need to do instead and putting your emotions aside? I
Yeah.
really want your
So here's the thing. Think about science. Is science done emotion free? No, of course not. Curiosity is a big driver in science, to discover new things, to explore, to ask questions. What's another big emotion that's part of science? Skepticism. How do we see that? You write a paper about atomic theory, you publish it, your peers review it. And what are they doing? One of their tasks is to say, here's what we know right now, right? Here's what's being said. Which am I going to believe? Right? And that's skepticism. What do I choose to believe? Is it this, or is it this, or is it integrated, these two? So science is not emotions free. It has predominant emotions that drive it, or at the heart of it. Now, what people often say is, oh, but we don't want emotions to cloud, right, the research. Fine, that's perfect, right? So there's certain emotions that would be helpful and certain emotions that would not be helpful, right? For instance, the emotion of naivete, right, is to trust whatever somebody says. Well, in science, that doesn't work, right? That's actually how we get quite bad science sometimes. But there's also emotions that can help us. There's an emotion called dispassion, which is the emotion where we recognize our emotions, but in essence, we set them aside so that we can approach things from a pragmatic and practical perspective. So we're not focusing on our emotions, we're not paying attention to them, but they're there. So when we do something dispassionately, it's probably the closest thing we can be to being objective intellectually, right? We still have emotions, but we're not letting the emotions drive us, right? We're choosing to focus on emotions like curiosity, skepticism, certainty, uncertainty, right? The emotions that help us. And there's other emotions, right? Honor, doing the right thing. That's part of science, choosing what to study, what not to study. So I think that in every discipline, there are emotions, but we haven't recognized that. And they're part of everything. So in my view, the challenge or the opportunity isn't to get rid of emotions, but it's to learn enough about emotions and to have a broad enough, deep enough understanding of emotions that I can be in choice, and I can select the emotions that will serve me to do the best, whether it's thinking in a certain way. What's the emotion that's going to allow me to create? What's the emotion that's going to allow me to focus on the numbers? What's the emotion that's going to allow me to interact with the people on my team? Right? All of these have a basis in emotions. They don't deny the intellect, right? Of course, your intellect is part of it, but so are the emotions. They're partners in this dance. So if we look at anything, we see that, the choices you make at the grocery store, those are driven by emotions as much as they're driven by the logic of how much money you have in your wallet. Yeah, okay, great, lovely. They're partners, but we haven't seen them as partners.
I love what you said. They are partners, and this solves a lot of issues, a lot of debates, because we're used to put this war between intellect and emotions, like what we should listen. Instead, as you say, they're partners. We always are driven by both, like it or not, being aware of it or not. So in the example that I gave before, like about the two entrepreneurs working, the one is neglecting the emotions, keep working, the other is being succumbed to the emotions. Both of them are wrong, because both of them are either listening only to the emotions or only to the intellect. So in your opinion, they are partners. So you can listen to the emotions and to the intellect. You can say, okay, so what my emotions are telling me, so what is my intellect telling me, so what I need to do, and then do it constructively from that point, when you understand the both sides, because you are not just your mind, you're also your heart. That's why we are speaking right now. Do you believe that
So let me address one thing you just said. The person who really applies themselves, who works really hard, that comes from an emotion. It might come from ambition, it might come from urgency, it might come from fear, but there's emotions driving them to do that. Well, that's fine, and maybe that will lead to the success they're seeking. But here's the thing is, if they only have those emotions available, they may exhaust themselves. They may become sick because they don't have emotions available like joy to celebrate, or contentment or satisfaction. They don't have emotions available to rest, relax, and celebrate. And so they're always driving themselves for more. So there's nothing wrong with that, except that sometimes when we don't have a broad palette of emotions, we favor certain emotions, right? And the person who works so hard is favoring and is comfortable with certain emotions. And of course, if those produce results, then they want to use those emotions even more. And again, fine, until it becomes counterproductive. And that's when we need to be able to see that that ambition is not serving me right now. For instance, when you go on vacation, I just need to lay on the beach and relax. Well, if you're feeling ambitious, you can't do that because you don't have the emotion present that allows you to, lay on the beach and relax. So it's not about, great, there are emotions that help us. Super. Well, if those are strong, fantastic, but don't neglect the rest, because the rest of the emotions are equally as important at some point for some purpose. And that's why I favor this broad palette. If you understand all the possibilities, then when you realize that ambition is not serving you in this moment, you have 200 other emotions to choose from. Well, how fantastic is that? It's like having an incredible menu of possibilities emotionally.
I have a quick question for you. Do you believe that intuition is an emotion, or is it completely different occurrence in itself?
Yeah. To be honest, I don't know what intuition is. I suspect that intuition is a mix of our body knowing, our emotional knowing, and our intellectual knowing. So I see it as a mix. And the way I experience and understand intuition is that we know something, but we don't know how we know it. And it may come because of a very subtle clue physically or somatically. It may come because of a very, I don't know, quiet clue emotionally. There may be some thought involved in it. So I'm not an expert on intuition, except that I would say, if you feel intuitions, listen to them and consider the possibility that there is an emotional component to it, and what would that emotion be? So it's not for me about something that either to say, oh, this is really good or really bad, but it's another tool possibly just to help us in life.
Do you believe that emotions within themselves, because there is a theory that our human brain cannot process a lot data at the same time. So whenever our body knows, whenever we know something subconsciously, and we cannot consciously quickly enough come with the solution, our mind cannot tell to us what it is, but we know it subconsciously. We are experiencing an emotion because the emotion is like a compressed file of a lot of information that we cannot process consciously. So we are subconsciously expressing this, and basically our being is giving us this message because our conscious mind cannot yet process it consciously.
Maybe, I don't know. My perspective is And the thing I focus on is the practical aspect, like how do these work in daily life? So I don't, what I know from my experience and from all my reading and conversations is that sometimes emotions seem to originate in the brain, right? As we're thinking something and then we begin feeling something. In other situations, we're feeling something and then we begin thinking or we begin noticing what we're thinking. But sometimes something happens somatically in the body, and that triggers an emotion, and that connects with the language. So for me, I see them as a coherent dynamic, is that they all influence each other. And I'm not really sure which comes first because I'm not sure that one always does come first. I think that they're all places where we receive input about what's happening around us. We process it, we try to make sense of it through those three lenses. You know, what's logical or rational about this? What's emotional about this? What's somatic about this? And then, you know, from there, when we understand it as best we can, we try to choose to do something about it. So for me, that's how I tend to see this. I think all three of these help us filter what's happening around us and make sense of it.
How do you distinguish between emotions that are coming from your soul that you should listen to and random emotions that you just picked up from your life, like maybe you slept bad, or maybe you didn't eat your breakfast, or maybe your hormones are not good and balanced? So how do you distinguish between an emotion that you should listen to and an emotion that's just coming and going that's not important to listen to? Or do you maybe believe that you should listen to all emotions, but if you listen to all emotions, then how do you distinguish the anger I'm feeling is because I didn't eat breakfast? The
Mm-hmm.
irritability I feel is because I didn't eat breakfast, didn't sleep good,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe it's because I will project it onto something else in my life and say it's because
Mm-hmm.
of this. So how do you
Yep.
distinguish between?
Well, I think you just named it. You know, some emotions are more profound than others. If you think about agony, anguish, rage, well, these are emotions that are very profound, that they have to do with something more essential for us than irritation and annoyance, right? Irritation and annoyance are telling us that something we would like something to change, or we'd like to get away from something, or we'd like something to stop. And so those are emotions that show up in the day to day, like, oh, I'm hungry, I didn't have breakfast. Now, many people will say, right, I feel hangry, right? I'm hungry and I feel anger. But my challenge to them would be, is it really anger? Because anger would mean there's something unjust. So it could be, you could be hungry and you could be angry about it because, let's say, you know, your neighbors have food and you don't have food, and that's unjust to you. Nobody will share with you. Well, that would produce anger. But if it's just simply the discomfort of you not having eaten breakfast, then I would say it's probably something more like irritation. Like it's something I would like to stop. It's cueing me to do something about that, but it's not existential. It's not in your soul, right? And I think there are other emotions that are awe, wonder. Those are at the level of the soul. But, you know, enjoying something or affection, you know, those can be quite light, delight. You know, that's not a particularly deep emotion, but we have emotions that are very profound. And those are the ones that I would connect with those deeper experiences, the ones you're talking about connected with the soul.
This brings us to another question, like, for example, it's proven that when we are hungry, we are more susceptible to anger because we are more irritatable. So the anger that we will feel, that will come because we are hungry, will still hold the same message, or it will be a different message than the anger that we might feel if we eat them and we are normal, we
No.
are healthy, and we approach everyday life in a normal way, compared to the anger that we will feel when we are angry, and we are hungry, and because we were hungry we got irritated, and because we got irritated we got angry. So will this
Yeah.
anger still hold the same message?
Yeah. So for me, yes, because emotions are consistent in that way. And here's an example. So with sadness, right? You can feel a profound sadness because your partner dies, right? Or somebody in your life who you were very close to passes away. So you feel this profound loss, profound anger. But you can also feel sadness, a little sadness, just simply because, you were expecting somebody to call you and they didn't call you, right? And so there's a loss, right? There's a loss of connection with that person or a loss of opportunity with that person. So the depth, the intensity of it for me doesn't change the emotion. You think about anger. Anger is related to injustice. Well, we can be completely silent in anger, right? We're not saying anything, and yet we're still angry, right? We can turn a cold shoulder, we can ignore people, we can withhold information. There's lots of things we could do that are fairly subtle and quiet. And also, we can yell and scream and hit people and hurt people from anger, but they're all anger. If we can say, the root of this is I believe that there is something unjust being done to me or to someone I care about. So this is the language emotion connection for me, is that sadness is always connected with I've lost something I care about. If I didn't care about it and I lost it, I won't feel sad. Right? If I care about it and I haven't lost it, I won't feel sad. Sadness always is telling us the same thing, but sometimes it's telling us in a very loud voice, and sometimes it's telling us that very quietly, but it doesn't change the emotion. The emotion is still sadness. And I think this is why, if you ask somebody if they're sad, they'll say, no, I'm not a sad person, or no, I'm not sad. Well, maybe they are, but the sadness for them, they don't recognize it because it's actually quite small. And we lose lots of things in life that we care about. So sadness is a part of life, but sometimes the sadness is quite small and, we get over it in 5 minutes. It's very short-lived. And sometimes the sadness is so profound. For instance, I'll give you an example for me, is the man who co-wrote The Field Guide to Emotions with me passed away 18 months ago. And I feel many days a loss. I feel sad about the fact that we can no longer collaborate. I can no longer talk to him. And I expect that that'll be with me for the rest of my life, right? So that's for me a profound sadness. But it's trying to tell me something. Like, I really cared about him. I do care about him, right? And that's what sadness tells us. What do we care about? So I think that, the more we can understand emotions, the more useful they are as tools. And to answer your question, no, I don't think they do. The profile of the emotion doesn't change. What changes is life. We don't know when we'll lose something we care about. So we don't know when we'll feel sad, but the moment we begin to feel sadness, we can recognize that we've lost something we care about and the degree to which we cared about it.
What is the purpose of sadness? Is it just to tell us that we cared about something and it shows up only after we lost that thing? Or is there some other purpose of sadness that it shows?
No, it tells us what we care about. Yeah. So I'll ask you, you have a partner?
Yeah.
Okay. So if that partner left you or died or was no longer in your life, would you be sad?
Definitely.
Okay. Would you be a little sad or a lot sad?
Profoundly sad.
Okay. That tells you how much you care about her. You haven't lost her, right? Maybe you won't ever, but it tells you just by doing that mental exercise. Okay. I'll ask you something else. So, do you have a car?
No, I'm not driving.
Okay. So do you have a favorite pair of shoes?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's imagine you leave your favorite pair of shoes outside the door of your house and somebody takes them. Would you be sad?
I will.
Okay. Would you be a
I
little
will
sad
probably
or
be angry too.
okay, probably angry too. But would you be a little sad or a lot sad?
I will be a little sad compared to
Okay.
that example. A lot.
Yeah. So right. So it tells you care about them, but not as much as your partner. Yeah. So sadness, the whole purpose to me is it tells us what we care about. And that's really helpful because think about it. You're trying to decide if you want to leave your job, quit your job, or move someplace else. Well, all you have to do is think about, am I going to feel sad in that new place, or having left this job or the place that I am? And that tells you the degree to which you care about that. And it doesn't matter if it's a place, a person, a dog, money, your car, your shoes, it doesn't matter. Your health, right? It tells you the degree to which you care about things in life. And how valuable is that to know? And you don't have to lose it to know that.
So the purpose of sadness is basically to tell us how important something is to us, but to give us a hindsight of what, for example, we think about losing that thing, and then sadness is fulfilling its purpose. But my question is, why it's showing up after we are losing the thing? Why it's not showing up before that, so we are more aware of it?
Well, because sometimes we didn't think we could lose the thing. You know, a lot of times we don't really believe somebody's going to die. We don't really believe somebody's going to leave us. We don't really believe somebody's going to steal our shoes if we leave them outside. Right? So we don't really think about that. But once it's happened, we can't avoid it. Once it happens, it's full in front of us. And then we go, oh my gosh. And sadness, I would say it's absolutely important to honor and recognize, and it takes time to move through, right, to resolve. And it's not intended to make us feel bad. Its intention is to tell us, you really cared about this person. They were so important in your life. And that actually may help us think about, well, who else is important in my life that I want to be sure to pay attention to? So it's very helpful not just to reflect on the past, but also to project and to plan our future. And you hear this from people many times, right? A friend dies, and what do they say? I regret that I didn't call them more often. And then what do? They say, you know what? I'm going to make a schedule to call my friends every month. Well, regret is doing its work. Yeah.
I love what you said about sadness. The purpose of sadness being that whenever we lose something, is not just to tell us that that thing mattered so much to us, but also to make us think about what else matters that much to us, that deep to us, so we can maybe re-evaluate the choices in our life. What I had an honor to do with one coach. They're doing it's called the death practice, and you're basically going through a meditation where you're thinking about that you died right now in this moment, and you're picturing your funeral, and you're picturing all the people coming there. Then the meditation is guiding you and telling you, okay, what about your life you regret the most not doing till now? Who you should have spent more time with that you didn't spend? What words would have wanted to say to somebody? And all of these questions, like what would you just this question, like what would you have not do that much and invest that time to something else? These questions, this perspective that you get through this meditation is so profound, because after it you are feeling like reborn, because after meditation they say, okay, now a genie comes, an angel or whatever you believe in, and, okay, now you know the answers, and now you have a second chance. So now live your life, and it resurrects you. You are coming back to where you just died, but you don't die now, and now you have your life to live, the information that you have. So this probably what sadness in your words is also the purpose. So because it's whenever you lose something so important, you rethink what else was important. And but I believe a lot of people are not, they're not unfortunately they're not approaching sadness in such a way. They're running away from it. They're trying to hide from it. They're trying to distract themselves from it in social media and playing video games, in alcohol, maybe even drugs. They're just trying to escape the sensation that sadness is coming with, because it's unpleasant, thinking that it's something negative. And this is where we come to suppressing the emotions. This is where we come to avoiding the emotions and not processing the emotion, not getting the message, which is so destructive habit, and it's basically hijacking your life. Because after that, no matter how much you escape the emotion is still there within you, within your nerves. It's pending to be processed, and you're not processed.
Mm-hmm.
And everything else is colored by this emotion. A lot of scenarios in your life, because let's be honest, we are powerless when it comes to the subconscious mind if we are trying to approach it with the conscious mind. The conscious mind is only 5%. 95% of all your choices, decisions, emotions, everything you think comes from your subconscious mind. So if you store the emotion into your subconscious mind, into your unconscious mind, then believe it or don't believe it, it will drive you to make certain choices that will force you to relive this emotion over and over again until you process it. That's how our psyche works. So when we suppress our emotion, it's not, we are not running away from it. We are running away from it momentarily, but we are actually coloring all of our reality with it.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to hear your thoughts on this, and I want to hear your thoughts on how to clean this emotional self so we better understand the emotions that are coming to us, and we better understand what they're saying and have better emotional literacy in everyday life.
Yeah. Well, for me, what I've learned personally, and what I invite people to learn is, once we think about the language example, right? Is the better you get with language, the more fluent you are, the more fluid you are, right? As you just flow through the language. And we know that when you learn a new language, the moment when you really understand it is when you're fluent. It just happens. You begin thinking in that language, you begin responding in that language. It's just part of you. And the same thing, in my experience, happens with emotions. The better we learn them, the more time we spend immersed in them, so we experience them and we connect that experience with the story and the impulse and the purpose. The more distinctions we have, the more practice we have with them, the more fluent we get. So we move from emotionally illiterate to emotionally fluent. And it's quite similar to with language. And what happens when you get to emotional fluency is you don't have to stop and think about your emotion. You just realize in the moment as you're going through it, oh, look at that, I'm feeling a little bit of resentment, so I must think something is unfair. So the whole process, the whole experience of emotions changes from something that you need to pause and pay attention to something that just you flow through in life. It just happens. And you don't even realize sometimes that you're doing it, but it's another level of your relationship with emotions. So for me, this is the objective. And I think that this is what you're talking about. I'll give you an example for me. Several years ago, my sister died. Yeah. So I went to her funeral. And what was interesting is that, did I feel sadness? Yes, of course I felt sadness. But of course, there are many, many other emotions too. And what I noticed being there was how the emotions just flowed through me. In one moment I felt angry. Why? Because I felt something was unjust. In another moment I felt grateful. Why? Because, she'd been in my life for 60 years. In another moment I felt joy because I remembered how she was. But what was interesting was I didn't get caught or stuck, as we often say, in a particular emotion. It came, I noticed it, I acknowledged it. I was like, wow, look at that. And look at what I'm experiencing and what I'm thinking and what I'm connected with. And then pretty soon another emotion came along. And so for me, it demonstrated to me that, oh, I had reached this point of emotional fluency. And it wasn't that I was trying to do it. It's that, well, that's just how the emotion showed up and moved. By contrast, my two brothers and my sister, same sister had passed away. They don't work in this area, and they really struggled, particularly my younger brothers. I could see how much of an emotional struggle it was, and it was like they didn't know what to do with their emotions. Like they were so big and they were so strong, and they were so uncomfortable. And so for me, it demonstrated to me the value is that, when we have emotional fluency, is that we tend to flow through life much more easily. We recognize emotions in ourselves and in other people much more quickly. We're more emotionally agile, we're more emotionally resilient. And it's not that emotions never give us trouble. Of course they do. Sometimes, I get confused about my emotions. Sometimes I'm not sure what to do. Sometimes I'm uncertain or ambivalent or whatever. But I have a toolkit, right? I have this whole palette of emotions, and I can say, you know what? First of all, I'm going to identify where I am. And then I'm going to see, is that serving me? And then I'm going to think about, would it serve me more to be in a different emotion? And how would I get there? Or if I need to enter into a conversation that I think might be contentious or difficult or confusing to me, what emotion do I want in me that's going to allow me to have the best conversation I can imagine? So I can generate in me the emotion that's going to be most helpful, that I believe is going to be most helpful. So this is for me emotional navigation, right? When we begin to see that I have choice, I always know I have choice. Now I may not choose to change, but I have choice, right? I'm never the victim of my emotions. Sometimes I don't enjoy them, but I'm not a victim. They're just part of me, right? They're like a good friend who tells me the truth about things sometimes, and sometimes I don't like to hear that. Right? I don't want to hear, Dan, you're a little bit overweight. That's not something I want to hear. But my friend, if they're really a friend, would say that to me because why? They care about me. And I think that's the same with emotions. They care about you. They want you to listen to them for your benefit, not for their benefit.
What are some practical tips that you can give to everyday people so they become more emotionally literate?
Mm-hmm. The very first thing you can do is you can have a practice of noticing and naming your emotions. One of the things I assign to all my students is 3 times a day, pause, notice your emotion, just write down the name. That's all you have to do. You don't have to explain it, not journal, nothing like that. And keep a list and just see what happens with that list. Because one of the things you'll begin to see right away is some emotions show up repeatedly that you didn't expect to. Some emotions don't show up that you did expect to, right? There's patterns to them, different times a day. There's all kinds of things that you see just simply by stopping and noticing and naming your emotion. And then one of the things you can ask yourself is, if you wrote down anxiety, is it really anxiety? Right? Well, let me go to the thesaurus. What are all the emotions that might be similar to anxiety? And let me see if maybe it's one of those. And so little by little, you can build your emotional vocabulary based on your experience. Yeah. And most of us have a working vocabulary of 20 or 25 emotions. Those are the names we use over and over. Maybe for many people, it's less than 20. So, as you do this, you'll begin to add emotions to your vocabulary or to your palette. And the more you do, then the clearer you are, the better distinction you have about what you're experiencing. Then you'll see it in other people. So it's a very organic way to do it, but really the first 2 steps are always noticing and naming. That's it.
So thank you so much for being part of this podcast. I have a few more questions for you, and then we can wrap up.
Okay.
Give us an example, a little glimpse of what you're going to talk about on the Superhuman Summit.
Well, I'm going to talk about this, but I'm going to talk about it from the perspective of, we all have emotional potential, right, that we're not using. And mostly what we do is we train our intellectual potential, right? We want to get the most out of ourselves intellectually. And most of us have not gotten to the point of thinking, oh, well, maybe there's more potential here emotionally. And for me, that's really the focus of what we're going to talk about, because I think that when you see how much you could gain by paying attention to and developing your emotional understanding, your vocabulary, your ability to navigate and use emotions as a tool, Well, it is like a superpower. I mean, you begin to recognize things that you never recognized before. And, I do a lot of coaching. And what's interesting is because I know this area quite well, when a coachee begins talking, they can just say one or two sentences, and I can generally be pretty close on what emotion is at the root of their challenge or their problem. And if I say that to them, it sounds like I'm hearing the emotion of X. Sometimes to them, it looks like magic. Like, how did you know that? Well, I only know it because I'm familiar with it, because I know in me. And so I know in other people as well. So I think it really is it's a source of incredible potential that most of us have never tapped. And I'm going to focus more on specifics about, okay, so, in relationships or with yourself or at work or, in different parts of your life, what's the possibility? What's the potential emotionally that you may be missing?
That's so exciting. I cannot wait.
That's
Literally.
an emotion. Wow.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's excitement and awe and inspiration and motivation, just everything to make this summit as great as possible and as epic as possible. And I agree with you 100% in everything that you said. I know how much being able to tap into your emotional self can change your life and can make you literally like a superhuman to other people, because you know things about other people just by speaking with them with few sentences, like you say, that they might not even know about themselves, but when you say it, they are becoming aware and they're like, whoa, like you, how do you know? You're so good at psychology, they'll say. But you just know the emotions, and it's really like a
Yeah.
superpower. But another way how this is a superpower is because you can also control the emotions that you feel by certain practices. For example, having a thankfulness journal or thinking about 3 things that you're thankful for in the morning can shift your whole day, your whole perception of the day. And when you shift your perception, you shift the options that you are perceiving, and just by that you will change your reality, because your emotions literally color your reality. If you want to test this, just put a horror movie at night alone and watch a horror movie. It's gonna be the same living room, the same bedroom, but you're gonna be scared to even sleep there, in
Yeah.
the same room that you sleep every day, just because you watched a horror movie and now you have the emotion of fear. It colors your reality, it shifts your reality, and now you're in a completely different reality. In the same place, different reality. In the same way, you can embody a different emotion and just like this change your reality, just like a superpower. So that's really the potential that a lot of people are not tapping into, and I love that we have you as an expert to speak about this and to help people become more aware of this and tap into this superpower. Thank you so much, Dan. I'm truly grateful and thankful to everything that you're doing. I had such fun having this conversation. It was so inspiring.
Yeah,
And
it's been
tell
a
a lot.
pleasure. Been a pleasure. I look forward to it, and we'll have more conversations. So
Definitely. Where can people find you if they're interested in speaking with you?
I think the simplest way is either on LinkedIn. You can just put in Dan Newby and I'll show up. My website is schoolofemotions.world. So if you want to go to schoolofemotions.world, you can contact me through that. It also lists my courses, books, all the things that I'm doing. So either one of those is fine. LinkedIn is very easy to find me on LinkedIn. So please contact me. Let's have a conversation. No, I love this topic, as you can see. And really, for me, my vision, my passion is that people in the world become emotionally literate. And I don't care who. I don't care if it's teachers, doctors, parents, adolescents, kids, whatever. I think it helps all of us. And, I can only reach so many people. So I want more and more people to embrace these ideas and to share them with people. And for me, that is what I think my purpose is. Why? I'm not sure why it's my purpose, but here I am doing it and I enjoy it immensely. So, and I'm very grateful. So Thank you for inviting me. It's been a delight.
Thank you too, Dan. It's beautiful what you said. And thank you for all of you to have listened to this podcast. If you want to grab your 4-day pass for the Superhuman Summit, you can find the link in the description. We will also leave the link of the of Dan Newby's LinkedIn, so you can go, and if you want to connect with him, you can connect with him there. So again, if you are interested in getting your ticket for the Superhuman Summit, it costs the less than 1 meal. So go to the link in the description, click that link, grab your ticket. You can thank us later, because this summit is going to be the most epic summit that you can be part of, because it's not just a summit, it's a start of a journey that at the end of it, you are transformed into a superhuman. We will go to each of the 4 fundamental pillars: the spirit, the mind, the body, and the heart. Dan is going to be talking at the Day of the Heart, 14th of November. And this talk that we had today, everything that we said is just a glimpse, just a hint at what your emotional superpower really is. So this is just one tiny glimpse that if you go to the summit, you will discover, and you will embrace it, and you will harness this superpower of your heart. This being said, I want to invite you again, go to the link in the description, or go to lifecoachcode.com/superhuman summit and grab your 4-day pass. It was a great conversation. Thank you again, Dan, and see you in the next episode.